most of the time is on our Medicinal Monday show here, but now we're joined by Rob Dhoble, and he is in Pennsylvania right now. Rob, tell us a little bit about what you do at Havas, because that's where you are, correct?
Yeah. I've been at Havas for a little over a year. I was fortunate that I was able to be brought in to lead a new business called simply Havas ECS, where the ECS stands for endocannabinoid science. So offices in New York and New Jersey supporting clients that are either prescription cannabinoid, medical cannabis, or what we call non-prescription cannabis, like hemp products like that.
There you go. And Alissa speaks very highly of you as well. It's one of the things I get to do. Whenever I need something about CBD, I go to Alissa, and then Alissa opens up the door to like dozens of these educated people from the medicinal space that is so fascinating to me. How remarkable is it how much we've learned about this plant and how much more we have to learn about this plant?
It's that's probably a nice kickoff tee up for. We're still all students, right?
Right?
Even the brightest of us is bright in a particular area, whether that area is medicine, extraction, growing and cultivation, or even biosynthesis more and more, where it's not even grown, but it's manufactured. There's more that we don't know, probably. I know that the literature says cannabinoids, there's about 100 to 200 clinically worthwhile ones. We only talk about 2 or 3. So if that's the tip of the iceberg, I think it's kind of laid out that way.
So if the two biggest ones are the THC and the CBD, which is I think what you're alluding to, and I definitely passed that test. What are some of the other ones that are out there that perhaps show a lot of promise? And I know Alissa has been talking to me about, is it CBN or is it CBDA, Alissa?
A little both. I mean, CBG, there's a handful of them. And I think CBDA was the first one I gave you a sample of to try. And that's the raw form of basically the best way to describe it. But I mean, I think where Rob and I come, especially into this, is from such a different perspective, like a raw form, like we came from the pharmaceutical industry. That's kind of what got us chatting, I believe. And it is a completely different universe. Like I don't know if you want to expand upon that, Rob, but we're both trying to speak to physicians about this, and it's challenging when you're talking about a raw form versus decarb. It's just a different language that we're speaking. So
Jimmy, to your question up front and to what Alissa just said, the education of physicians, nurses, pharmacists, physicians assistants is much more advanced in every other area except this, right? That's not because of our laws necessarily, but it's because of our educational system. And if the pharmaceutical industry is excellent at doing anything, it's about how to market their products appropriately based upon the pre-existing training of those physicians. That pre-existing training is to use the scientific method as opposed to kind of raw agriculture to kind of figure things out, as an example. But unless there's a teaching and a learning and a certification to this space, doctors aren't going to participate because it's uncomfortable. It's downright scary if it's still Schedule 1. I could lose my license maybe. But more importantly, if I didn't learn it in medical school, I'm taught to either refer that person to somebody who's maybe more expert in that, or if it's a complete nonsense, try to shut it down. And if I didn't learn it in medical school and nobody's come to me with any real professional kind of 2020 caliber education on the topic, I'm probably right to dismiss cannabis as a fringe science. The issue is that it's not a fringe science. And the fact that it's growing and growing and growing to now over 30 conditions where there's legitimate clinical evidence that'll stand up in a courtroom, in a boardroom, and in an exam room. Some doctors are privy to that information in states that allow such a freer practice of medicine. Most aren't. And at Havas CCS, as Alissa knows, we set our sights on filling that education gap. So our first project was for us, and it was a service to clients, and that is a CME program that helps a physician, nurse, or pharmacist go from novice to really conversational expert, not just on cannabis, because keep in mind, cannabis is the treatment. What's the condition? The condition is the endocannabinoid system related condition that they weren't taught about in medical school. So there's a whole bunch of promise. We know a lot less than we will know. But before we go much further, we need to let the doctors catch up, because if we're treating ourselves, well, I don't do that with my car. So, why would I do that with my body? So that's where the science and the medicine, in my mind, especially for serious conditions, it requires adjustment of medications that I might be taking. Am I going to do that on my own? But at the same time, do I know of a doctor trained in this area that can understand cannabis and old-fashioned medicine all in the same? And that's what people struggle with, especially parents of children or people caretaking people with serious conditions where cannabis may be beneficial. When you talk to them, their biggest, I don't know if it's their biggest, financially is probably the biggest, but their first challenge is finding a doctor that will either talk to them, and then if they will talk to them, actually help them. And thanks to social media, I know of 5 or 6 in the nation that make it their full practice of helping people like that. Unfortunately, that's the vast minority of physicians out there.
We're starting to see more universities embrace the science behind the cannabis plant to be part of their curriculum. Is at least accepting that there is plenty of places to study this plant. Is that the first step to perhaps getting it into the curriculum of the medical schools, and then having a new generation of doctors and nurses that are coming out of the medical community or into the medical community? Are they going to start being the trailblazers in this new frontier?
What do you think, Alissa?
Oh, I don't even know how to. This industry never ceases to amaze me. I don't predict. I'm trying to evolve with it. I don't know.
One of the new ones, if you look at the courses that are in schools, just overall for medical, pharmacy, life sciences, like the Cornell Integrative Plant Sciences program, there are an enormous number of courses and programs that teach a craft or a distillation, or there's a craft approach to the entire education system, but it leaves the medical schools really out.
Yeah.
One of the challenges with cannabis for most doctors is that cannabis is not a pharmaceutical, with the exception of 3 products, maybe 4 soon in our country. But they're not prescription products. And if they're not prescription products, and they're actually not even OTC products because they're not nutritional supplements per the law, well, how does a doctor dose them? How does a doctor prescribe a particular formulation? Mm-hmm. So the precision of medicine requires something more than just cannabis. And I think what we're seeing state by state is the emergence of products that are unique formulations, including, and no laughter please, suppositories. Why? As I've been taught, there's a whole science to suppositories giving relatively fast and long sustained relief for certain conditions, without going through a first pass oral metabolism. And it's also precision dosing. You know exactly how much when it went in and so forth. So That is what's appealing to physicians. So if they get a response, they know how to titrate and adjust from it. And if the formulation itself is not a dosable, titratable form, what are we even talking about? We're talking about self-care again. And the doctor says, I don't want anything to do with that. So we're fortunate that we're working with a few clients now that are developing cannabis formulations, not as FDA approved drugs, but as pharmaceutical quality formulations that have data. Maybe the data is bioavailability data. So the doctor knows, oh, to get this much in, I'll try this much and we'll see how it goes. Some companies are actually doing the clinical trials, and that's not so cheap and that's not so easy. But they're really betting that their unique formulations will solve medical needs that the prescription drugs just don't solve yet. And that's really promising to see the emergence of brands where it's not just about cachet and remembering and loyalty, but brands that I heard about from my doctor, my nurse, or my pharmacist.
So I know how I go about, I guess I feel like I found some of those brands, but it's you have to search pretty hard to find one that topically might actually deliver. Well, we've talked back and forth a little bit about, I go back and forth myself on delivery systems. And I think that the pharmaceutical industry, 40% of patients have a hard time swallowing a pill. That was something I never learned a lot about that. That was never much of a pushback, I guess, when I called on physicians. But I do think there's a large need, like some of these tinctures. You and I have talked about this a little bit. Like I wanted to stay in that dependability of a capsule or what we know of as a pharmaceutical, but there's such a need. So when you bring up suppository, no, I totally agree. As weird as that sounds in the beginning, I've learned about that a bit in the hormonal space, and that's like a very big thing. It just works better. It's cheaper. It's easier, and doesn't transfer as easily if you.
And you don't have to worry, did I hold it under my tongue long enough or did I swallow it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes,
so,
exactly.
But what I'm to maybe connect some of the questions, Jimmy, is nobody walks into a liquor store and buys alcohol unless you're in college and you're buying grain alcohol, maybe for a punch. You go in there with a specific purpose. And I only use that not because medicinal cannabis is like alcohol, but the industries are set up dispensary wise almost the exact same way. And the emergence of brands that appeal to the customer for self-care and mutually, because they're dosable, titratable, non-smokable, child resistant, there's a list. You're seeing the emergence of a formulary where, mark my words, people will be hearing about brands like Moxie. Well, what's Moxie? Moxie's a brand of very precision grown and formulated cannabis that's available throughout dispensaries in Pennsylvania. It's grown in a special place in Pittsburgh. People don't know it as from McKeesport. They know it as Moxie. And it comes in different forms that are dosable and titratable. And they're not a client of ours. That's why I'm freely expressing this. But nobody smokes cigarettes either. They smoke a particular brand. Not in favor of that. Nobody eats food. They buy particular products. So cannabis is turning that corner as the doctors start participating. They just want to know the 2 or 3 brands available in their local area that they can reliably recommend by dose and by dosing frequency. So that's not a huge ask, but that's the practical steps that I think we're headed towards. A formulary of products that, don't want to say Moxie again, there's a lot of other brands, but the Xerox phase is about to kick in.
I know I could not be more on the same page, because it's like as soon as you get the buy-in, I've got to be honest, like I've been hesitant to recommend products to family, even to family and friends, because it's like I personally believe there are more bad products out there than good ones, and that we're buying from the marketing people and not the scientists. We're just not buying from who we should be. And I think such great potential. I have to ask you a question with obviously the election coming up and all of the possibilities. What do you see happening as it relates to deregulation or potential deregulation?
Well, with a lot of the civil unrest focused on expungement, I think both parties, regardless of who wins the election, both platforms have talked about the benefits of cannabis-related convictions being expunged. Why? Lots of reasons, including discriminatory policing and things that I've heard both parties really take ownership of. The one difference in the platforms, and it's hard to know where the Republican platform is because there really wasn't one this year. It was a little different. But the Democratic platform, based upon what Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden agreed when Joe got Bernie's endorsement, they agreed that cannabis would be rescheduled, not descheduled. And what rescheduled really is code word for is 50 state medical cannabis. Well, if there's 50 state medical cannabis, what's going to happen next? Well, that same platform says nothing's going to happen next. The states will decide on recreational. And just like they control their own liquor control boards, let the states control that. But when it comes to federal, there's enough evidence now to say that it shouldn't be Schedule 1 that says there's no medicinal value. It should be something less than that, a Schedule 2 or a Schedule 3 perhaps. I've heard people talk about either. The kicker is when it's Schedule 2 or Schedule 3, it's real medicine now. And if it's real medicine, the question is, well, how come my insurance won't pay for this?
Right.
And the workers' comp insurance in 6 states already says you are paying for this, especially if it's chronic pain versus opioids. So I don't know where it's headed, but the rescheduling will allow cannabis to be used as an intervention that's reimbursed, probably starting first where the goal is to do less harm as opposed to the most good, because that's the way medicine is kind of practiced, right?
Mm-hmm.
So rescheduling to Schedule 2 or 3, within 2 or 3 months, lawsuits demanding, why doesn't insurance pay for my cannabis? It pays for my Schedule 2 or 3 sleeping aid.
Yeah.
Why isn't it paying for my cannabis that's legally prescribed here in my state? And without the ability to hide behind or justify Schedule 1 as a reason not to reimburse, it's going to be challenging for insurance companies to deny much longer, especially if there's real evidence for particular formulation. So again, nobody wants to reimburse for cannabis. It's how do you dose it?
Right.
What strain is it? Just like preparation H is a preparation, a formulation. Those type of products that meet specific medical needs. That's where the world's going, and I think the rescheduling, not descheduling, and people hear those words so differently, but rescheduling just means medical cannabis 50 states.
That's interesting.
And probably without cards, unless you have a recreational need. Who knows? It's when it's not a Schedule 1 issue, and keep in mind DEA dogs for the last 2 years have not been trained on cannabis smelling,
Right.
sniffing. They're assigned to schools right now. They're not retired yet, but that tells you where things are going.
And do you think we can catch doctors up and, help to, well, we'll look to you, I guess, because we have a lot of work to do to catch up physicians who might be using this. That's the thing.
They're way behind.
Yeah.
Look, on March 1st in France, cannabis becomes medical cannabis program kicks off with reimbursement following 2 years head start by Germany. It's part of medicine. And if you don't want to participate, that's okay, but you better know enough to refer somebody, unless you're going to keep prescribing products that somebody else may think are more unsafe than the cannabis.
Do you see, for the most part, a lot of people who have been introduced to the medicinal side of cannabis turn to it almost as a last resort? They've exhausted a lot of the options available to them through their own medical doctors, and then it's like, we got nothing else to lose here. Let's try the cannabis thing. What will it take to get to the point where the doctors are going to say, we want to look at this as a first option, not a last option?
If we're talking in the United States, we're probably talking about issues relating to malpractice, issues relating to tort and liability, right? You could say the medical system runs fine in America. It runs on fear and greed. But that kind of not joke aside, what you have is you have a system that is paying for things that if there was a full medical review, might pay for things in a reverse order of safety and effectiveness. What does that mean? So as a medication of last resort in 6 states, by either legislature or court judgment, workers' comp insurers must pay for medical cannabis for the treatment of chronic pain, if it was indicated and legal. They not as a medication of first resort, but as a medication of last resort. And I think that while that may tug at our heartstrings and say, why is that? We have to realize that it's being put up against other things that are proven FDA-approved medication.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of in a junior league status to begin with. So for that reason alone, a conservative physician says, well, of course, I would exhaust the prescription-approved therapies. Where that changes is when the harm reduction question comes into play. And that, in the case of chronic pain and opioids, is why those 6 states, and maybe a few more, force the insurance companies to pay. Some of the insurance companies would prefer to pay for cannabis, and that may happen soon. Why? Well, if I'm an insurer and I'm paying for somebody's hip or knee surgery, and the data from IQVIA says that up to 12% of those patients, orthopedic soft tissue surgery patients, if they take opioids for more than 5 days, there's a greater than 50% chance they'll be taking those opiates a year from then. Medically acquired addiction to opiates is a real issue. And shorter courses of opiates combined with cannabidiol, shorter course opiate prescriptions or lower dose as well, combined with medical cannabis, you only have to search the internet a little bit to see that those have been proven in some patients to be effective. So harm reduction is, I think, where the courts it's going to go. Havas did a symposium, sponsored a symposium along with Everyday Health, Cannabis BPO, Basilite Health Systems at Columbia University last year. And we did a mock trial where there was a doctor on trial. The doctor was on trial for just following the law, prescribing Percocet, even though the patient was saying, doctor, I need something more. I'm even drinking now to kill the pain. I need something else. I can't just, can you please increase my dose? Doctor wouldn't do that. Doctor also wouldn't refer the patient to a medical cannabis specialist. Patient gets into a car accident, kills people. So the court case is now against the doctor for malpractice. And when it went to a vote, the equivalent of the jury, which were doctors in the audience, a full 1/3 of the audience members thought that the doctor practiced below the minimum standard of care by not at least referring that patient for cannabis evaluation. So the doctor, 66%, wins the case, but that was last year. There's even more evidence this. So I think a lot of this in America is going to be battled out in the courtroom, where the focus isn't going to be on the greatness of cannabis and its clinical potential. It'll be more focused on where can cannabis mitigate risk and harm reduction caused by other medicines that are legal and reimbursed.
Wow. And that's why I always say, people ask me about investing in cannabis space. I go, find a good law firm to invest in, because they're going to make it no matter what happens, right? That's the way it works. Rob Dhoble from Havas, I really appreciate you taking some time today and joining Alissa and myself on this show. And if people want to find out about Havas, that's the website to go to, right?
If you go to havasecs.com, you'll learn about our educational offerings and reimbursement strategies, in particular for medicinal cannabis, prescription cannabinoids, and hemp-based products.
There you go, havasecs.com. Rob Dhoble, thank you so much for joining us again. And Lord knows, buckle up your seatbelt for the next 48 hours. It's going to be a wild ride, I think, and appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you both.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Yeah.
Well.